Cale Orion stood at the edge of the landing bay, staring at the soft blue light that marked the airlock to the Arkphonic starship, Verdant Spiral, his heart beating faster than it had in years, not because of fear, but because he was bringing someone who could change everything a human, not modified or altered, but whole, brave, and willing. And as the doors slid open with a deep chime, the silence of the ship greeted them like a breath held too long, and Dr. Elena Moore stepped inside slowly, her eyes wide with awe and confusion, as the walls shimmered with alien patterns that pulsed like living veins. And though she had studied Arkphonic music, history, and language back on Earth, nothing had prepared her for the real thing, the sensation that the ship itself was watching her, listening to her thoughts, maybe even reacting to her fear. And Cale, tall and calm, with his smooth voice and glowing green veins running faintly under his skin, touched her shoulder gently and said, "You're safe here." But even he didn't sound sure, because returning after 5 years as the first human-Arkphonic hybrid was not easy, especially now with Elena at his side. And already he could feel the quiet tension ripple through the corridors as they passed a hum just beneath the usual harmony of the ship, like a discordant note that didn't belong. And from the corners of the corridor, some Arkphonic crew watched them silently, their transparent robes shifting with color, their long limbs curling slightly inward, their large violet eyes full of unreadable thoughts. And Cale led her through the winding pathways, each wall breathing with soft vibrations, until they reached her quarters, a space designed quickly, maybe awkwardly, to suit a human. And when Elena stepped inside, the light followed her, changing color as she moved. And though it was beautiful, she suddenly felt very far from home, and when the door closed behind her, the silence felt heavier than it should, like the walls had something to say, but were holding back. And later that night, as she lay in the strange, soft bed, half asleep, she thought she heard a voice, not in words, but in tones like music speaking directly to her mind. And though she tried to convince herself it was just her imagination, a whisper of melody drifted through the room again, and this time it seemed to call her name. And far across the ship, in the council chamber, Cyril, one of the oldest Arkphonics, stood in front of a circle of shimmering minds and said, "The human is here." And some of the others murmured in discontent, while one asked softly, "Why has the loon stirred?" And Cyril replied, "Because it remembers." And back in her room, Elena sat up suddenly, heart racing, as she realized the sound she had heard wasn't coming from outside. It was inside the walls, or maybe even inside her own thoughts. And the strange truth began to take shape. She hadn't just stepped onto a ship. She had stepped into something alive, something ancient, and it had noticed her. Elena woke up with a strange chill on her skin, though the air in her room was warm and still, and the soft lights above her pulsed gently like the heartbeat of something sleeping just above her head. And as she sat up, the memory of last night came rushing back, the sound, the voice without words, the strange music that had seemed to call her name. And though she told herself it had been a dream, her heart said otherwise. And when she stepped out into the corridor, Cale was waiting for her, his expression calm but his eyes watching closely. And as they walked together through the twisting hallways of the verdant spiral, Elena asked carefully, "Do your walls ever speak to you?" And Cale slowed his step, a flicker of something passing through his face, then replied, "They sing, but only to those who know how to listen," and he tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes, and they moved in. Silence past a group of Arkphonic crew members who stepped aside without speaking, their robes flickering with colors. Elena couldn't understand, and Cale brought her to a chamber filled with light and soft sounds, where she was shown the Arkphonic method of learning through shared memory. Images passed directly into the chi. Mind, not through words, but through feelings and tone, and as she opened herself to the stream, she felt overwhelmed by beauty. Entire forests made of glass, oceans that sang with the wind, cities where creatures floated instead of walked. But underneath that beauty was something else, something faint and hidden, like a shadow behind the light. And when the session ended, Elena looked at Cale and asked, "What was that other sound I heard? The one hiding?" And Cale looked away and said nothing. And later, in her room, the voice returned, not loud, not angry, but curious, as if it were trying to understand her. And this time it didn't feel frightening. It felt lonely, like something buried deep was reaching out for the first time in years. And when Elena touched the wall, a soft vibration moved through her hand, and she whispered, "Who are you?" And the tone she received in return made her eyes fill with tears. It was sorrow, deep and old, and it wrapped around her like a cold wind in an empty hall. And she knew then that the ship was not just alive. It remembered things no one else wanted to speak about. And across the ship, in the council chamber, Cyril spoke again to the others and said, "The loom responds to her. It has not done so since the last breach." And another asked, "Will it awaken the fracture again?" And Cyril only said, "It depends on the human." And while Cale worked to guide Elena through more lessons, she started to notice changes hallways that shifted their shape when she approached, lights that dimmed when she was sad, doors that opened before she touched them. And Cale began to worry, because even he had not been welcomed like this. Not at first, not even after his full transformation. And one night Elena sat on the floor of her room, listening to the sounds in the walls, and this time the voice gave her an image, a memory. Not her own, a tall Arkphonic being in a storm of broken sound, a collapse of harmony, a scream in music, and a human figure lost in that chaos. And when she blinked, the image was gone, and her heart raced, because that human had not been her, but someone else, a human who had once come before her and had been forgotten or erased. And the next morning she went to Cale and said, "You told me I was the first recruit." And he nodded, confused, and she said, "Then why did I see someone else?" And Cale froze, his voice quiet, as he asked, "Where did you see them?" And when she told him, his face turned pale, and he whispered that memory should not exist, and the room around them dimmed slightly, as if the ship itself had heard them and was thinking. Cale sat in silence for a long time after Elena told him what she had seen, and the soft light of the chamber flickered uncertainly, like the ship itself was listening and didn't know how to react. And finally he said, in a low voice, "There was someone before you, but the memory was sealed. Not just in the records, but in the loom itself." And Elena leaned forward, her voice steady. "Why? What happened to them?" And Cale shook his head slowly, pain flickering in his eyes. "I don't know all of it, only that the merge failed and something was lost." And as he spoke, the ship gave a faint tremble, not from motion, but from emotion, as if it, too, remembered, and did not want to, and Elena stood up, walking to the wall, pressing her hand against its smooth surface, and the hum beneath her skin was stronger now, like a pulse in her bones, and the voice returned not as a whisper, but as a song, low and deep, and filled with broken harmony. And this time it pushed a memory into her mind that was too strong to resist. A chamber of light cracking apart, a human voice screaming in fear, an Arkphonic voice weeping beside it, and then silence, heavy and endless. And when Elena stumbled back, she realized the memory wasn't just old, it had been buried because it was too painful to keep. And the human she had seen had not been a recruit, but someone who had merged like Kale, someone who didn't survive the connection. And now the ship held that memory like a wound that never healed. And Kale looked at her with fear in his voice. "The loom is showing you things it never showed me." And she whispered, "Maybe because I haven't changed. Maybe because I'm still fully human." And that thought stayed with them as they moved through the ship, trying to understand what the loom was trying to tell them. And every time Elena listened, the images became clearer, a place inside. The ship sealed off where the broken merge had happened, and she asked Kale if they could go there, and though he resisted, finally he agreed. And together they went down into the lower levels, where the walls grew darker, the air colder, and even the lights stopped pulsing with their usual rhythm. And at the end of a narrow hallway, they found a door without markings, cold to the touch, and when Elena stepped near it, the door opened by itself, slow and silent, revealing a chamber that looked like no other. Twisted walls, glass-like strands hanging like frozen vines, and at the center a seat shaped for two. One side broken, the other untouched, and Elena stepped forward, her breath shallow, and said softly, "This is where it happened." And Kale nodded, his voice rough. "The first merge. They called it the fracture." And as the word echoed, the loon's voice filled the room, not loud but deep, and it spoke not in words, but in a wave of sound that pressed against their thoughts, showing them the full memory, two beings trying to connect, minds too different, emotions too strong, and in the end both breaking apart, leaving behind silence and sorrow. And Elena felt tears rise as she said, "It wasn't a failure, it was a warning." And the loom sent one final image, her own face, standing in front of the council, holding something in her hands, a light of two colors woven together. And then the vision vanished, and Kale said, "It's giving you a choice." And Elena turned to him, heart pounding. "It wants me to go through the merge." And Kale looked down, then met her eyes. But not like before, not by becoming something new, but by staying who you are. And the ship around them gave a soft, deep tone, like agreement, like hope waking up from a long sleep. The moment Elena stepped out of the broken merge chamber, the walls of the ship changed, the soft lights flickered into new colors she had never seen before, and the air felt heavier, like the ship had taken a breath after a long silence. And as she looked at Kale, she saw the same realization in his eyes. The loom had begun to stir in ways even he could not understand, and the song in the walls grew. Louder that night, not angry or frightening, but full of emotion, hope, grief, longing, and something like warning. And as Elena walked the quiet corridors alone, every step was followed by a soft vibration, like the ship itself was guiding her somewhere. And when she reached the thought chamber again, the door opened for her without a touch, and inside the air shimmered like heat, and the center of the room pulsed with light, and the loom's voice filled her mind, not as sound but as feeling, and in a wave of thought she saw it how the Arkphonic people had once tried to connect with a different species, how they had believed perfect unity was possible, but how their minds, too different, too structured, and too wild, had pulled each other apart, leaving scars deep inside the ship's memory, and she understood now why they feared another merge, why they had buried the memory and never spoken of it again. And yet the loom had chosen her, not because she was like the others, but because she was different human, unpredictable, emotional, and still whole. And when Kale entered the chamber, drawn by the same force, he saw Elena standing inside a circle of light, her eyes closed, her breath calm, and he reached for her, but a pulse of energy stopped him gently. And then the loom showed him what it had shown her, a possible future where the merge didn't erase identity but balanced it, where human feeling and Arkphonic harmony could work side by side without destroying either. And Kale stepped back, understanding that this time he would not lead, he would follow. And Elena opened her eyes and said softly, "It wants me to listen, not change." And so she stayed in the thought chamber for hours, maybe days' time. Was strange inside the loom's mind, and slowly the strange tones she once heard became words, not spoken but understood, and the loom revealed its fear, that unity might again lead to silence, that if they tried and failed once more, the true Arkphonic people would close themselves forever. And Elena whispered, "Then we cannot fail." And the chamber responded with a soft burst of light, a single note that vibrated through the ship and reached every being aboard. And across the halls Arkphonic crew paused, some closing their eyes, some stepping back, for they felt something they had never felt from a human before, not curiosity, not ambition, but deep listening. And the council called Kale before them again, asking if this new recruit was safe, and Kale replied, "She does not want to change the ship. She wants to understand it." And Cyril, oldest among them, nodded slowly and said, "Then the loom may give her what it never gave us." And the next day Elena emerged from the chamber, tired but glowing, and she told Kale that the loom had given her a final test, a place deep inside its core, where the true song of the fracture was still stored, a song only she could hear. And if she could understand it without losing herself, the ship would allow the merge, but only on her terms. And so Kale brought her to the core path, where no human had walked before, and the walls there were darker, less welcoming. But Elena walked with steady steps, the song in her mind growing clearer, and when she reached the core, she found it not as a machine or room, but as a vast space filled with sound and light, and at its center a spinning pattern of memories, colors, and voices, and she stepped into it without fear, letting it flood her mind. And what she found there was not chaos, but two voices still echoing from the past, the first human and first Arkphonic who had tried and failed, their sorrow trapped in a loop of unfinished harmony. And Elena did not try to fix them. She listened. She cried. She whispered to them that they were not forgotten. And then she sang not a perfect song, but a human one, flawed and warm, and the core answered with light, and the ship gave a deep, rising tone like a sigh of relief. And across the verdant spiral silence fell for a moment, followed by a new sound, a harmony that had never been heard before. And Kale, waiting outside the core, knew then that she had done what no one else could. She had made the ship remember without pain, and opened a path between two minds, two worlds, without losing herself. When Elena stepped out of the core, the ship was quiet in a new way not. Silent, but thoughtful, like it was listening more closely than ever before, and Cale stood there waiting, eyes wide with something between hope and fear. But when he saw her calm expression and the faint shimmer in her eyes, he knew the ship had accepted her not as a danger, but as a key, and she whispered, "It sang with me," and Cale nodded, understanding that something old had been healed, or at least touched gently for the first time in ages. And as they walked back through the long corridors of the verdant spiral, the lights changed colors as they passed. Not random, but in slow, careful patterns, like a message forming word by word. And Elena could now understand them, not fully, but enough to feel their meaning welcome new path. Not alone, and when they reached the council chamber, the members were already waiting, their long forms glowing softly, robes flowing like moving water, and Cyril spoke without delay. The loom has confirmed it. The memory is released. The fracture is whole, and Elena stepped forward, not nervous now, but steady, and said, "It wasn't about becoming the same. It was about understanding each other." And the council was quiet for a moment until another elder said, "Then, the first real merge has finally begun." And Cale placed a hand over his chest and added, "Not of bodies, but of minds," and the council approved the new path, allowing the project to continue, but differently this time, not by changing humans into Arkphonics or Arkphonics into humans, but by building a connection where both could stay who they were and work together in ways they had never imagined. And over the next days, Elena and Cale worked side by side to create something called the Shared Bridge, a new chamber where human and Arkphonic minds could link briefly, safely, through emotion and memory, not through total merging. And when the chamber was ready, Elena became the first to test it, stepping in alone, her mind open and across the stars. The loom connected her to a young Arkphonic on a sister ship, and in moments they shared memories, Elena's childhood laughter, Earth's green forests, the thrill of discovery, and the Arkphonic responded with images of singing winds, glowing rivers, and the deep peace of shared silence. And when they disconnected, both wept, not from sadness, but from joy, and soon more joined, first carefully, then with wonder, and the bridge became a living symbol of what two worlds could do when they stopped trying to become each other and instead listened with open hearts. And Cale watched it all unfold with quiet pride, knowing that everything he had gone through, all the pain of being in between, had led to this. And one morning, as the ship prepared to return to Earth, the loom itself spoke through the thought chamber for all to hear, saying in a voice of light and sound, "She carries the song of balance," and Elena, now called the listener by many Arkphonics, stood at the window of the ship as Earth came into view, blue, wild, full of noise and life, and she knew the mission had just begun, because now she would return not just as a scientist or a guest, but as an ambassador between two worlds, carrying a message no one had ever delivered before, a message born from sorrow, healed by understanding, and shaped by the human heart. And as she turned to Cale and smiled, she whispered, "Let's show them what a new song sounds like." And the stars in their silent way seemed to listen.